In this Spanish Armada Ireland webcast, we discuss the production of a new Spanish Armada docudrama based on the life of Francisco de Cuéllar, a Spanish Armada captain who was shipwrecked at Streedagh Beach in Sligo in the year 1588. I'm joined by director Al Butler from Mediacoop. Hello, Al.
Hey guys, how are you today?
Very well, thanks. We're also joined by Fernando Corral, who took on the lead role of Francisco de Cuéllar. Hi, Fernando.
Hi.
And also we have Lynne Williams on with us, who was responsible for the set design, for props and for costumes as well. Hello, Lynne. How are you?
Hi there.
Okay, so I think we're okay to keep going. First of all, Al, we might start with you. Just in terms of, say, Francisco de Cuéllar, this was obviously a story that was 400 and whatever many years, 430 plus years old. To transpose that story from 1588 to the screen in 2020, how difficult a challenge was that?
It was funny, I think everybody learns a little bit about Spanish Armada in school here, in Ireland. And so I wasn't aware that the letter existed before I read the brief. And then I went digging around, went through the letter, and immediately it's all there, he obviously told the story because he wanted it to be interesting to the reader, so that there's kind of a natural arc to it. So when I dove into it, I could straight away see how we could tell the story. And, it's not necessarily a perfect linear story. He kind of bounces around a little bit, but it was all there. And I was amazed that no one had ever actually got in and done like a feature version of this before, because it's there for the taking, And so it was, I think when we first tackled it and we came and met the team, Spanish Armada Ireland, we kind of could see it straight away how we were going to execute it.
Fernando, we better tell people, just in case they don't know, there is a letter. So tell us a bit about your role, or the person whose role you played, Francisco de Cuéllar. Like, what do we know about him, and how do we know about that he survived the Armada at Streedagh?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I didn't know anything about Francisco de Cuéllar before I did these auditions. But once I read the letter, what I can say from him, from the letter, and from what I think from him, the way he was, I think he might be exaggerate a little bit in the letter to tell the story the way he wanted to tell the story, because what I just lived in 4 days shooting with you all there with clothes, and compared to what he lived during 6-7 months naked, as he says, without shoes, I don't know. It might be a little bit exaggerated, but well, he was definitely a brave man, with so much courage, so much honor to defend on that letter, and a very lucky, definitely a lucky man.
Yes, and Al, just to go back to the letter for a second. So what we know is that, 3 ships were wrecked at Streedagh Beach, part of the retreating Armada who had lost the battle with England. They got caught up in winter storms. They got beaten up on the beach, basically, and most of the people died. And Francisco de Cuéllar and a small number of people escape, go cross country. He survives for 7 months in Ireland and then escapes ultimately and writes this letter. So that letter was the basis for the script, wasn't it, that you wrote?
Yeah, so I suppose when we started it initially, the request was that we actually had 4 stories. And those 4 stories were compartmentalized into the various phases of his journey from... and so what we tried to take on was to actually try and, first of all, contextualize the story in itself, because I think not everybody who arrives in Grange to see this story is going to know about the Spanish Armada, why it occurred. And so it was important, I think, to start at that point and try and contextualize who he was and why this actually happened in the first place. And then from there, we could really get stuck into the actual story of de Cuéllar himself. So then we were able to break it down into the various different phases of his journey, one being the actual shipwrecking and the arriving on the beach itself, and the first few days where he tries to, I suppose, gather his bearings. the second phase where he makes his way to O'Rourke's castle, and then the third phase where he ultimately figures out how he's going to get off the island. And that's kind of where we started the story, and how we tried to approach it was that you had these very distinct blocks. Now, the letter itself has an awful lot more in it than we were ever going to be able to tell. And he doesn't necessarily tell it in the most linear of fashions either. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make it into the story simply because there's a bit of repetitiveness in the way he tells the story. And then there's a little bit of embellishment, I think, on his part as well. And so I think we embellished it somewhat on our side, but we also recognise the fact that he probably embellished too, because we both had to serve, a different era of storytelling in order to get our message across.
And what a story it was. And Lynne, for you, it gave you the opportunity. I know you sat in on one of our early production meetings, and I just knew that your enthusiasm was up straight away. It was like a chance to get all that stuff out that probably doesn't come out from your props department too often. So how did you set up in terms of, say, what you were able to do and what you wanted to do, and what, I suppose, overall look the film got as a result?
Yeah, actually, I've done things from this era quite a bit in the past, which is why I had stuff in the prop store. I didn't actually have to make very much at all to make this work. And I was aware of the story of Francisco de Cuéllar, because he's been done as a little insert in a few stories for previous documentaries that we do. But the main interest in that is that you get to do, first of all, you get to try and create a feel for a time. And I have the stuff to do that. I have the weaponry, I have the props, I have the costumes on hand. But it's also very interesting to try and do a juxtaposition between three different cultures, because you've got the late 16th century Spanish look, which is quite distinctive in itself. It's a sort of fashion of its own. You have the native Irish, which are unique in their time. And you also have some of the English in there as well. So you've got three things to try and make distinctive and set them all into their own times as well. So it's a great fun, and it's a challenge to make that happen.
Okay.
And then of course you're dealing with the actual places, which makes it even more exciting, because you're getting a chance to try and make it look as if it might have really looked like that. So that's the main thing. It's a challenge. It's always a challenge to do these things, but when you've got the stuff at hand to make it work, it's just really marvelous to be able to get it all out and let it play.
Okay, and look, we'll talk a little bit about the 4 days on site that we had to shoot the film in a few minutes. But before that, Al, there were a number of really big challenges that you guys at Mediacoop had to get around. One of which was the fact that in September 1588, 3 great ships of the Armada were wrecked on the beach. How, with bearing in mind we didn't have 3 great ships, how did you go about doing that one?
Yeah, well, so, CGI obviously is quite cost prohibitive, and so we kind of looked at it a lot of different ways. We knew, and having spoken to yourself, Micheál, and spoken to Eddie, the crash on the beach was really important to you guys, because it's kind of the main visual that sticks with everybody when they think of the Spanish Armada. Most people don't think of them wandering through the countryside. They really see those ships. And I suppose that's where there's actual tangible history as well to be discovered. And I think that's why it's so important. And so we began the process of looking at every which way we could do this. And I mean, like, we literally went from looking at models on eBay and trying to see, could we actually recreate the ships, in a tank, and we looked at every which way we could to try and see the best way to tackle it. But we were quite fortunate in that we had a few guys that we've worked with in the past who were based outside of Ireland. They've worked on major projects for Marvel and for Disney. And we were able to wrangle a team of guys together who were kind of on the off season, for lack of a better chance, but they were basically in between projects, and they were willing to come on board and actually take it on. And we storyboarded it out with them. We basically told them what we wanted to do, and they were, they said it was going to be viable. And we were quite lucky that they were really passionate about actually getting involved in trying to create the wave patterns. That was one of the things that really connected with them. And one of the guys, his wife is actually from Sligo, and so between one thing and another, we just kind of looked out and we managed to put this really good crew of guys together who were willing to take the project on, and I think they did a really good job of bringing it to life. It's pretty up there, I think.
And Fernando, for you, you got your hands on the script, and then you, I suppose, had to prepare yourself for what Al was going to put you through on that beach. And some of those scenes were, as we know from the letter, were going to be pretty trying for any actor. So did you know what you were letting yourself in for?
Well, what I did, the first thing I did is going to Grange and go directly to the beach and stay there for a couple of hours, just, I don't know, thinking about everything that happened, all the suffering, all the shipwreck, everything. And I started to get the feeling. And after that, talking to Al and reading a lot from the character, I got the sense of more or less what I had to do. Because, as I said, I mean, Al said before, we all have sometime heard about Francisco de Cuéllar or studied or in Spain. We didn't know anything about Francisco. I mean, there are a lot of people who know about the Spanish Armada, and I'm sure about Francisco de Cuéllar, but we don't really study what happened. So I didn't have a particular background about it. So, yeah,
it was great. It was wonderful. Al, can I just ask you, in terms of what you were looking for from the actors and how kind of realistic, or like were you trying to create something that was as gritty as it might have been back in those days where people were basically being butchered on the beach, or were you into the more entertainment thing, thinking that there could be people at home who might never know anything about the Armada but wanted to watch a good film?
Yeah, I think it was important for everybody that when they went to the museum, they actually got to watch it. I think it started from the point that I remember going to see things when I was doing my junior cert or leaving cert or whatever it was, and you go along to some museum and you might watch something that might not bring you in completely as a story. And I think that's what I wanted to achieve, and I think that's what we wanted to achieve here at Mediacoop, was to create something that if you're 15 and you go along to a museum and you watch it, that you go like, oh, that was actually really good, you know? And that was kind of where we started out in terms of the tone, was to make something that was both informative and was engaging and really felt like a proper story. And in terms of the actors, like we really put Fernando through his paces when we were doing our casting. I think he was a bit surprised at how much we made him work for it. But we needed to know like that when we got there, because we knew it was going to be really, really rough. And we knew we were filming in the middle of winter. We knew the weather was going to be brutal. And we needed to know that our main actor was 100% committed to being put through his paces. And he absolutely delivered.
Lynne, coming back to you for a second then. Just give us an idea of the devices that you had to use to paint the picture, to dress the characters, the props that they had to use, and I suppose the process that you went through in order to get the scenes sorted and ready for Al.
Yeah, well, the first problem we had is that in the letter it mentions that he's stripped naked, and this is after he's come off the ship and he's come off the beach. He says that he lies naked on the beach, nearly dying from the cold, and then he plats together a little skirt of grass, of nakedness. And very obviously we couldn't do that to Fernando, much as we wanted to. So I had to come up with something that made him look as if he'd been stripped down and was injured, which he was at the time, and pretty beaten up, without actually causing him hypothermia or killing him. So what we came up with there was a way to just have him wearing what would have been his underwear, which is knee-length brays, they're called, which is linen underwear and a shirt. And that allowed us to put at least something under his feet, because he also mentions that he was running through the woods in his bare feet and he was getting torn by the things. So we did as much as we could to try and save him, but it was pretty brutal, I would say, for him, not only because it was freezing cold, but also because he was basically having to run around in a wood in slippers. And
in soaking clothes. And tell me, Lynne, I know you had one device because there's a fight scene in that particular area, And when you're fighting and one of the characters has a knife, how did you get around the whole idea, the whole thing of we don't want anyone getting injured?
Well, we had basically three weapons. You have the original weapon for close-up stuff, which is a real knife, and then you have a resin one, which is a knife without an edge, and then you have what we actually used to do the stabbing, which was a rubber knife. So you start off with something like this, which is a real knife. And very obviously, I mean, it's a real metal knife. It's got a point. You can't bring that anywhere near anyone. And you end up with something that's a soft rubber knife. So we managed to do that without hurting anybody, I hope, including the person using the knife, because actors can get a little bit overexcited, which is why you don't give them real weapons, obviously. So that's one thing that you would always do. You'd always have what's called a hero weapon, the rubber and the soft. And you just change them in and out according to how your camera angle is going and what part of the fight you're in.
Okay. And Al, so you then had to I suppose, direct your way through all this with a big crew of people, not wanting to keep the actors from getting completely soaked, even though I think by the second day that was impossible to do because we were on the beach at that stage. But how do you keep the fact that there's, there could be 15 or 20 people on set, all doing different jobs, keeping the show moving, keep an eye on the clock, moving on to the next scene. It just, I'd say it was nonstop to get all that crammed into 4 days.
Yeah, it was challenging. It was mainly challenging because we didn't have like an AD or to kind of run the set. So we were very much relying on everybody to kind of just dig in and make it work. Like you really learn on something like this, just like filmmaking like this is a team sport, and it doesn't work if everybody's not 100% committed. And when you have great people like Lynne on board, it just and her whole crew actually, it just makes it work so well. It was like we were moving so fast, we just had to get the shots, make fast decisions, and then once we felt we could move on, we'd move on. But yeah, look, we got it all done in 4 days, and I think we covered an awful lot of ground, and we got some great stuff. But what was kind of challenging was we more or less had 2 crews on the go as well the whole time. We had the A crew, which was kind of doing the main bulk of the action with Fernando and stuff that he had to get through. And Fernando was in pretty much every scene. But then we also had to capture a lot of other aspects of it. And that was just a lot of B-roll that the second unit were getting, a lot of aerial stuff. And so we had to kind of manage that as well and make sure that we were managing our time and getting every aspect that we needed covered in order to cover the whole story. But again, it doesn't work unless you got a great team, and we really lucked out because we got great people. Everybody loved the story as well. That's the funny thing. Everyone was all in on the story. And I remember every time we met up with Lynne, she had all these books, and Lynne, you take these books out and you'd be like, this is exactly what this is what this is. And we have to make decisions because some of the more traditional garb is kind of outrageous. They were really, really colorful, and it's not at all what you kind of connect to the era. And so we were trying to find a nice balance as well, where we didn't go full Hollywood, but at the same time, we didn't make it look completely unrealistic. And if it wasn't for someone with Lynne's knowledge, it would have been so hard to achieve that, So having a great team there, Tommy, the DOP, and all of the camera guys, it's just everyone pulled together, And Francois, who was the second unit director as well, did a great job. And Max, the producer, was everyone, really.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a noticeable feature of the film, was that everybody just seemed to get that Spanish Armada bug. Everybody went way beyond what was expected. And for us as a group at Spanish Armada Ireland, we were just so thrilled that people got the story that we've been kind of bellowing about for so many years at this stage, and it really comes across on screen. There's a big day. The second day was the big day. I think it was the day on the beach at Streedagh, which is obviously the centerpiece of where the real action happened, where the 3 ships ran aground and de Cuéllar tries to escape from the beach. Fernando, I want to ask you about that scene where you come out of the water essentially, and you have to fight your way through English soldiers, Irish savages, to make your way off the beach while people are falling down, being stabbed, being killed, being hacked down around you. That was a scene that coincided with this massive storm just blowing in off the Atlantic on the day we were filming it, and it was it was just one of those things. You didn't really need the special effects, I think, afterwards.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'm still surprised about it because even in the same day, we had snow, we had wind, we had everything, but sun, I think.
True.
But right in the minute that Al said action, right in that minute, not even 2 minutes before or later, right in that moment, it started that storm. I mean, it was unbelievable. I still remember the wind that we had to stop a couple of times because the whole team couldn't even stand, and especially the cold, because it was like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 degrees, and those ice cubes from the sky falling. It was hard, so hard, but very real, very real for the scene we were shooting. And I still remember, like, Al next to me talking to me, and I couldn't even hear what he was saying. It was like, yeah, okay. It was crazy, but I think the footage we got is amazing.
Yeah, it's worth it, Al, when you see it all come together, isn't it? That scene was just such a spectacle in every sense.
It was a pretty rough morning, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, you know, we again, it was like Lynn's guys. We knew the challenge there was that we had this enormous beach, and you just can't set dress a whole beach. It's impossible. But we knew we could make a channel that we could get the guys to run through and get Fernando to run through. And so the guys spent the morning working so hard to build this little channel that was just like a run that you could go through. And we basically knew that we could then work backwards from the beach up and then make use of this channel and bring all the extras through and actually just create this kind of scene where, you know, people were banging off each other and sword fighting in the background. But the weather was just, it was shocking, like, you know. And I don't think it even comes across on camera how bad it was, to be honest with you. I think when you feel like there's a little bit of behind the scenes footage that somebody has, Micheál, I think you shot it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my God, you know.
And that was one of the scenes, was it not, that you did the least amount of rehearsal for, because you couldn't. Everybody just jumped in and it was there.
Yeah, so I suppose myself and Tommy, the DOP, we kind of blocked the scene with the extras, and we knew basically where they were, what the action was more or less going to be. And then, you know, Fernando had already had a rough morning at that point. You know, it wasn't like the first thing we'd done. We'd already been fairly battered, and we brought them down and we said, okay, this is what we need to do. And we kind of walked them through the action that we'd set out. And then Fernando had a few ideas around it as well. And then we did it. And I think we did it 4 times. And at that point, I was like, okay, I think we're okay. We had it. And Fernando was like, one more time. And we went and did it again. And it was really rough. But I actually don't think that was the worst of it. I think the worst was actually before we broke for lunch. And we were doing the scene with the fight when he gets attacked. And Catherine basically comes along and kind of saves Francesco and sends him on his way. The weather was so bad at that point, we actually had to stop because it was basically unshootable. And I think that was the worst point of the day because the conditions were really, really harsh. But again, everyone was on the beach for that. For those setups, everyone was on the beach. Everyone was pulling together. We had all the extras. Like Lynne had been working all morning, getting all the Lynne. I can't even remember how many people had in costume, but
I think 22.
You know, there's a lot of bodies and everybody in full costume, and that was. I'm sure it was a very challenging morning for you guys to get everybody ready. You know, we're just swanning around with our cameras waiting for people, but again, a massive team effort to make it work.
Well, Lynne, it was probably the central, most challenging part of the shoot for you, or am I wrong? I don't know if you ever got all of your props back with that.
No, some of them blew away. Some of them did blow away. No, well, you totally won the meteorological lottery on that one because, you know, you dialed in a storm and you got one. You were very clever the way that you used what we had. I mean, we only had what we had, and the way you set it up and could run the camera up through that was a very clever use of what was available to you. But the main challenges was to stop everything blowing away, and then when the tide started coming in, stopping more things from floating away. So it was an interesting day. It was an interesting day.
I'm sure it was.
Actually, forgot about the tide.
Oh yeah, the tide waits for no man.
We had factored the tide in, but we hadn't factored it to come in as fast as it came in. And we'd looked at tide charts, and I'd actually gone up on the Sunday, I think, so it was the day before we filmed. I went up to just check the tide, just to actually watch how quickly it came in. And I was kind of trying to work out, how much time we'd actually have. But on the day, it came in even faster than I anticipated. So we really were, everything was down to the wire. But it worked, I think. It worked.
Yeah. And by comparison, the final 2 days were relatively sedate and manageable affairs taking place in Parks Castle, most of the interior scenes and the Maglancy castle scenes. But one thing that I want to ask you about, Al, is the recreation of some of the sites, the key locations that de Cuéllar name checks or that he references. Obviously, he didn't give them a name per se in the letter, but we know that it's likely that he went to Streedagh Abbey, where he finds 12 comrades of his hanging from the rafters. We know that he goes to one of O'Rourke's castles, likely to have been a castle town, and we know that we know for sure he goes to Rosclahar, where Maclancy's Island Keep was. So you had to go, just maybe explain to the audience about some of the walls, like literally in the case of Streedagh, one wall stands, and you rebuilt all those in post-production. Just tell us about that process.
Yeah. Well, it was, I think that was a real cooperation between our team and your team, because you guys really have the knowledge, I suppose, about what it would have looked like. Even down to the details of the type of roof that would have been on Streedagh, and then the type of castles that we would have seen in the other locations. So we had a lot of back and forth discussions, myself and yourself, sharing materials of what it would look like, what the textures would have been, and then basically we built replica models, and we shot essentially plates. So we went and shot the site, and we then placed the models onto those sites, and we kind of animated them in then to the actual site. So we use the real locations, or anyone who has gone on the tour, the castle is still there. But when we went up, and we kind of thought we might be able to get away with filming here, but like upon closer examination, you realise that it's actually just not safe. The location is castle's on its last legs. You got a good sense of what's there, and it kind of gives you a good starting point for the type of location it is. But then you start to think about, what else would, obviously a village would live around the castle. The castle wouldn't exist on its own, and so we kind of started from there. We tried to make it feel that way. That it was like a small village that lived around the castle. It was a really interesting process, that. Particularly O'Rourke's was great to do because I think it looks amazing, and I think they add those little flourishes, really bring the story to life that little bit more, because they also don't exist really, so to actually see them makes the story a little bit more believable. We had a lot of discussion around the ships as well. Like I think it's
sure.
Yeah, I think that's important to probably note, like that we didn't just grab 3 old ships and throw them in there. Like myself and yourself, we backed and forth on the ships, the type of sails, the number of levels of sails, the direction, the flags that were pointed in. Like we went into an awful lot of detail. Like the lanterns, there was a lot of thought went into trying to make it as accurate as possible, and to use the exact type of ship that they probably would have sailed on. I know you were in contact with Archaeology Ireland, was it? In terms of
with the National Museum, like people who actually dived on the site in 2015. Finbar Moore, who's a great colleague of ours, who was leader of the dive team from the Underwater Archaeology Unit, who recovered the cannon in 2015, and they felt personal, they wanted to be involved in some shape or form, and they gave us great advice in relation to the types of guns, the types of ships that were used, all of the rest of it, to make sure.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of conversations around the cannons, the positions of the cannons of the ship, the positions of every detail on the ship was really kind of trolled over to make sure that they would be, because they weren't, nimble, fighter ships. They were essentially transport ships that would have been heavily laden cannons. They weren't, some, as you say, parts of the Caribbean. They weren't, some sleek vessel. They were big, bulky units, and that was one of their reasons for their demise, I suppose.
Okay, so listen, we're almost out of time, but before we wrap it up, I'd like to ask you for your final reflections, and then I have one more question before we finish. So, Lynne, I might start with you. This was a massive project taken on by a group of probably very foolish people, a lot of people would say, but it worked. In my view, it worked. From your point of view, what are your reflections on the 4 days at Streedagh and I suppose the film that came together afterwards?
Well, the reason I do these things is because I want to be able to look at it and go, yes, that's what it would have looked like. And I think everybody achieved that, number one. So I was happy from my point of view. I was also very happy to work with a really passionate and engaged group of people. So that was great fun, because history is my passion and the reason I got into doing this in the first place. So to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are also into their history and care about it is very, very important as well. And added to which, it was a great crew, and it was a great bunch of people who just really gelled together and worked really well together for what was a big project for a small budget and a small group to take on. I mean, you produced stuff that was movie quality on a documentary, a small documentary budget. So you should all be very, very proud of that, and I'm proud of doing it.
Al, for you, it was probably, I don't know, I'm speaking on your behalf, was it the biggest project you'd taken on? It was a massive project in our view. So how did you feel, other than being exhausted, once the process had run its course?
Yeah, I think it was, I think all in all, it was about a year that it took, between when we initially met all the way through to production and post-production. But it was a great project, and I think that I'd love to be a fly on the wall now that it's actually up and running, when people actually go in and watch it, and do people walk away with the passion for Spanish Armada and want to find out more? And I suppose that was really the objective, was to kind of make people really engage with it. And if we've achieved that, well, then that's a win. But it was a great project to work on. We had great people working on it, from our guys here internally in Mediacoop, Neto and Colin and Francois and Marco, the editor, who did a really great job, and all the crew. So look, I think for me it was as I say, these things they're team projects, and they from everyone from yourself and Eddie all the way through to everybody who worked on it. Everybody has to come together, and I think it was great to see the whole thing coming together, and in the end to actually have a product that was that really worked, from the music, from Rob and everyone. I think I got really lucky by having a great team who really made my job much easier. And I didn't have such good people around me, I would have been lost, So thanks to everyone involved.
And in response to what you said about what people are saying about it, the response has been phenomenal. And we're having loads of people who are downloading the film, which is another way. You just don't have to come to Grange to see it in the visitor centre. You can also go online to SpanishArmadaIreland.com and download the film. It's available in English, and it's also available in Spanish. Fernando, I'm going to leave the final word to you, because as we know, Francisco de Cuéllar does escape from Ireland. He goes to Flanders. He writes his letter, which is to the King of Spain, we know ultimately, because he needs to get his freedom, because he ran into a bit of trouble on the high seas during the battle against the English, and he was sentenced to death, which was put in abeyance. It worked. He lives a long and fruitful life afterwards. He was one of the most interesting characters I've ever read about in history of any type, not to mind the history of the Spanish Armada. In your view, was Francisco de Cuéllar a hero, or was he a villain?
Well, my point of view is that he was a hero. Definitely. I mean, everything he went through, and the way he did it, it makes him a hero. I don't really know, and we don't really know if it was the way he said, but that is what we have, and that is that is what we have to believe. So if he survived to all those, he went over those dramatic moments and the weather and the hunger and the fear and the luck he had when he survived through all those things, and even with the Girona, that he didn't get to the Girona and he still survives and they all die. So it's like, it's amazing. His story is amazing, so he has to be a hero.
Before we wrap up here, I just want to thank the Mayo Sligo Leitrim ETB who have sponsored this particular webcast. And if you're interested in any of the other webcasts that we're running in this particular series, you can visit SpanishArmadaIreland.com for more information. So my thanks to Al, to Lynne, and to Fernando for being with us here today. And until next time, bye for now.